right, calling to order the regular meeting of the Bloomfield Hills Schools Board of Education. Today is June 16th. It is 6 p.m. Trustee Noble, will you please take attendance?
Everyone's in attendance except for Trustee Southward.
Thank you. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty, moving on to Section 2 of the agenda, administrative appointments. This will be presented by Superintendent West.
Yes, thank you, President Hill. Members of the board, I'm pleased to recommend Mr. Joe Duda to you for administrative appointment as our new Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources and Title IX Compliance Officer. Joe brings with him over 25 years of experience in public education, having served as a high school assistant principal, a middle school principal for more than a decade, and most recently as Director of Human Resources and Employee Relations for Rochester Community Schools. He brings deep expertise in recruitment, collective bargaining, onboarding employee relations, and compliance. He is a certified HR specialist and holds advanced degrees in education leadership from Oakland University and science education from Wayne State University. Joe was selected through a two-step interview process that included staff from every building level, special education, HR, administration, cabinet, and union leadership. The feedback highlighted is calm, collaborative leadership and strong understanding of human resources. We're looking forward to welcoming Joe to Bloomfield Hills Schools and look forward to the leadership and care he'll bring to this role.
Is there a motion?
I move the Board of Education to appoint Joseph Duda as the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources and Title IX Compliance Officer with an effective date of July 1st, 2025.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Motion passes 6-0. Please.
Good evening, Superintendent West, members of the board. To say that I'm honored at this appointment is probably the understatement of my lifetime. I am a lifelong public school educator. I'm actually a third generation. I believe very deeply in public education, and there's really no finer example than this school district. So to have the opportunity to be part of that is tremendous, and I don't take that responsibility lightly. I do believe HR has a really essential, important function in schools. It sometimes is thought of as something off to the side in the background, and there are a lot of things about HR in the background that are essential and important. But I think recruiting, hiring, and retaining staff is among the most important things that an organization can do. When I was a principal, I felt like that was the biggest lever that I had available to me to impact our students, was to hire the best people that we possibly could for our organization. So that's my work to do to continue that success here in Bloomfield. Building strong, trusting relationships, I think, is another important part in any role that I've ever had. Recognizing that the team in the room is the smartest person in the room, in building that collective understanding, I think, is really important, but focusing on honesty, trust, and respect. So for me, getting to know the people of Bloomfield, all of our employee groups, is really the most essential work for me moving forward. So I'm tremendously excited about that. I also want to thank my wife, who's also a tremendous public school educator, a high school teacher, and has been a supporter of me from the beginning. So I want to recognize her and apologize in advance for probably more hours away from home. But gladly, we'll be spending those hours here in service of Bloomfield Hills. So ready to roll my sleeves up and get to work in a couple of weeks, but I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Welcome aboard.
You're not Karen.
I didn't think she would send.
You're not Karen.
Man, Karen sent backup.
She texted her all.
By the way, this isn't personal to you. We take a lot of pictures. We're excited about this.
see how fast Corey came out?
Yeah.
Oh my
All right, moving on to Section 3, General Discussion. Section A, Board Committee Report. Superintendent West, if you don't mind calling the order of those, please.
Yes, if we would please start with curriculum and instruction.
Yes. So we met on June 3rd. Probably the biggest thing we spent the most time on was the talk about personal technology and the administrative guidelines that support that. And it's a really big topic. We've had discussions within this board, we've had discussions with the community, and actually even more important than just the community saying things, the students are actually saying this a lot too. And I think the students realize that while technology is very powerful and we require it to do the things we're doing, it also can become a burden in terms of time, mental health, things like that. So it's refreshing to see that they understand this as well. So, this is kind of all the backbone of these guidelines. I won't read through them, but linked inside of the agenda for the CNI or the meeting agenda notes for CNI, one of those things is a copy of the administrative guidelines going into the 2025-2026 year. Key things, during class, devices powered off, stored in teacher designated locations, basically anywhere in the classrooms, these devices are off, right? So where devices can be used, lunch and in between, passing through the hallways, whatever that may be, outside of the classroom. But once in the classroom, there's essentially no personal devices being utilized. Obviously, there's still, we had discussions there about what about this, what about that, and we acknowledge that there are probably some things that still need to be, talked about, but we got to start somewhere, and I think the team has done a really good job of working through this and getting some kind of starting point, and as we go through it, we'll learn more. In addition to that, there is a presentation that we were given through this that's also linked in there about healthy personal technology at Bloomfield Hills High School, which is what this is really centered around. So I would suggest everybody go through that, kind of look at that, why we're doing this, what it really means. And I think everybody's aware, but the slides in there really indicate, problems with depression, problems with mental illnesses, things like that, that are readily being linked to, technology use at a young age and what that means for these students. So again, encourage the group to go back and look at that. We talked really at length in our committee, but we know that teachers, administrators, central administration has been involved in this very deep. So this is not just something off the cuff that they're coming up with. This is through many engagements and a lot of discussions. So I feel confident that we're taking a step in the right direction. In addition to that, we discussed iReady, which the memo was linked in there, which was also given in a previous update for us in our Board of Education update. It describes the cost that goes into all this. I won't go into those details of everything that's all there. Again, potential funding sources. The good news for this is that as we go to iReady, it truly is a platform that can be utilized for some of the grants that we can take advantage of to supplement that cost, as opposed to what we're using now, which can't. So we're looking forward to having, potential cost savings in that regard, where we'll be able to use a platform that truly can benefit from that and hopefully be more beneficial for our students in terms of assessments, and then also beneficial for the teachers, which, as I have spent months looking at iReady, that's one of the things that stood out to me, is that yes, this is another assessment platform that we're giving to students to try to help understand where they're at and how we can, find any gaps, or if they're at a level, push them to succeed even higher. But it really also helps a teacher very quickly identify where those gaps exist and then give them resources. So it doesn't just say, Johnny is not proficient here. It says, Johnny isn't proficient here. Here's why, and here are resources that you can use to develop those skills that he may be or she may be lacking. So it's giving those teachers more resources, and that was very encouraging. We talked about AP and IB. That has been linked in there. That was also in some of the work we looked at in the assessment data. for the closed session, but that is available there. As far as AP and IP participation rates, obviously, we don't have, scores and all of that. We have the participation rates shared in there. We went through music equipment needs, which is still a big concern. There is music equipment is very expensive. Something that I've learned as going through this that you kind of take for granted how many pieces of musical instruments are out there, and then also how old it is. And we're kind of just getting by with some of that, and I think we need to do a better job supporting that, not just now for the need that we have, which we all agreed with is something we're going to do, but also in the future, how do we do a better job of making sure that planning for the future, we're not finding ourselves in this spot. So not necessarily something for this group to solve, but to put back for administration to really make sure that we've got a good long-term plan for how we continue to support our performing arts, and how do we make sure students are using equipment that fits their needs, and we're not having to do all kinds of costly repairs that are even worse. So we went through that, and I think the memo in there talks about what we're committing to, what we're suggesting, and what will be on the agenda for approval tonight. Lastly, I just want to mention the AI discussion. So we talked about all the work, which again, there's considerable work happening in there. I'm a part of the steering group going through that. And we have, I shouldn't say we, I didn't do it. I was a part of the group that looked at it and observed and provided feedback. But our technology, information technology, and learning technology group put together the AI guidance documents, as well as a getting started guide. Those are both linked in that as well. And they've done a tremendous job. I definitely want to give that group credit. Dave Shulkin and his team are not just participating in this. In terms of Oakland County, they're leading the way. So other school districts are looking to us in terms of best practices and how to do this right. We're doing a really good job. So we gave feedback on the acceptable use policy for this, the guides as far as what do we want to tell teachers about, what do we need to tell parents about as we get into using AI and what they're going to expect in the classroom. So that is linked in there as well. But kind of the takeaway is, I think for this group, we agreed that we need to be a little bit more informed of what this means before we kind of push this out. So we will be looking at a future study session for this group to kind of have that put in front of them, just so you guys are in the loop on what's changing, what's happening behind the scenes, because there is a lot. And I'm confident that we're doing really good things and that we've got the right people in charge of that. But I just want to make sure, because this is so game-changing, that everybody here has that on their radar. So we will move that to a future study session date. That is everything I have. If there's no questions.
Finance and operations.
Yeah, so on finance and operations, we spent significant amount of time on our meeting earlier on the 12th, going through the two main topics that we went through. So myself, Carolyn, and Lindsay, which is the budget, which will be presented tonight, and then significant amount of time doing our due diligence on the sinking fund, which we'll be presenting tonight, a recommendation to the community. So those two things, and then a bunch of things that are on, we discussed, and we will recommend that's on our board business tonight to approve. A lot of these things are going through the bond we talked about as well, so we've done a lot of that. So a lot of the discussion, what happened on Thursday's meeting. Any questions?
So on the strategic planning committee, as Paul said, we also spent a lot of time on Thursday going through the various items that we addressed in the committee as well. Primarily for the community, we're focused on looking at the data collected through Galapagos with regard to the why, mission, vision, and tagline generation. Galapagos had performed surveys to families and parents, students, and staff, gathered that information, integrated it, and then analyzed it and provided kind of summaries to us of the information along with vision, mission, why, and tagline statements. We continue to work on reviewing those. We're going to have another strategic Planning Committee in July, where we're going to kind of go back and look at what they provided, and then I think we're going to be voting on it at the next board meeting. And we also have, we're still in the process of the RFP. RFP was sent out, and I believe we are waiting on results that we can then look at. Any questions?
All right. Thank you for all of those updates. Moving on to B, Board Intern Program Recommendations.
Okay, so the process this year, so we had 37 applications, which was double from the year before. So, kudos to probably more so our current group that did a fabulous job this year. So I'm sure the word spread what a great opportunity it was. So, and again, significant thanks to Rebecca, who put together packets for me and Tarek, which were 37 applications, which was their applications, their resume, their letter of intent, including a video interview, which was a 3-minute interview that me and Tarek went through all of the applications and our recommendations. So within the board packet itself has letters. So everyone has a letter designated. So the recommendations for the board interns is letters J and GG. And then for Student Advisory Council, it's H, M, S, Q, H, I'm sorry, H, M, N, S, Q, I, I, U, and W. And then 2 people who happened to be on the program last year felt just as advisors now, so they would just be advisors, and that would be BB and FF. So that would be our recommendation.
And those letters all correspond to the individual applicants, so they know who they are?
Correct, yes. And so after this, there'll be, we'll send correspondence we'll thank the ones who applied that weren't, and then we'll send out the ones, so they'll all be notified this week.
All right. Any further discussion on that? No? Okay, moving on to agenda item 4, public hearing for a public comment. This is offered specifically to the adoption of the fiscal year 25-26 budget and 2025 tax rates. Is there any public comment? Not for the budget. All right, moving on to B, the public hearing on the adoption of the fiscal year 25-26 budget and 25 tax rates. This will be presented by Candace Moynihan, our Assistant Superintendent of Business Services.
Hi, good evening. Just going to get set up here. Okay. Good evening, Superintendent West, President Hill, members of the Board of Education. Thank you for your time this evening. As required by state law, we are required, prior to the adoption of the 25-26 budget, we are required to have a public meeting, a budget hearing, if you will, to disclose our tax rates to the community. So we'll be starting out with that this evening before we move on to the budget amendment for the 24-25 year for the general fund, and then walk through the 25-26 year. Okay. So this would be a summary of our 2025-26 property tax millage rates for our non-residential properties. For the general operating purposes, we will be levying 18 mills consistent with the current year. On primary resident exemption properties, so our residential properties, this is our, what we also call our hold harmless, would be more commonly known as. Also for general operating purposes, that is a millage of 4.3836. This is the millage that does follow the number of pupils in our school district. It's dependent upon property tax values as well. So as property tax values go up and we lose students and our enrollment declines, we do expect to see this millage continuously go down. The commercial personal property is a general operating millage, and that is the hold harmless plus another 6 mills, so 10.3836. And then on all classifications of property would be subject to the debt service millage for our bond, to pay back the bond, as well as sinking fund millage. So the debt service millage is not subject to the Headley rollback annually, but the sinking fund millage is. So we are going to levy the 2.75 mills on our debt to fulfill the debt service obligations for our bonds for next year. And that will change every year depending on the obligations. And then the sinking fund was subject to a rollback again this year. And you can see that the rate that we are, that will levy is that 0.6907, bringing in about $3.4 million to meet those sinking fund capital needs. This is a 5-year non-homestead millage comparison that would summarize the various millages on our non-residential properties. You can see here consistently with the 18 mills, the 2.75 for the debt. But as I mentioned, you can see from 24-25, even back to 23-24, when the sinking fund millage was renewed, that has been subject to the Headley rollback. So this year for 24-25, we're at 6.6935, and for next year we will be at 0.6907. And then again, the same comparison, but to our residential properties. And so you can see the impact of declining enrollment here and how that impacts the hold harmless millage rate. So we're at 4.5998 for the current year, and that is reduced to 4.3836. The debt millage remains the same, as well as the sinking fund millage. I will pause there for, that would conclude the actual public hearing of the tax rates. If there are any questions from the Board of Education at that point before we move on to our budget adoption. Okay, great. So moving on to the general fund, which will be the primary focus of the presentation this evening and the adoption. Our general fund, as you are all aware of, is the main operating fund of the school district for our K through 12. I'll actually add on to that for special education. That would go beyond grade 12 up to age 26. This would be the operating fund that funds all of those activities here at Bloomfield Hills Schools. As Paul already mentioned, Trustee Colin here, that we did spend quite a bit of time last Thursday, also at the Finance Committee prior to that, walking through and talking through the amendment for the 24-25 year for the final amendment, as well as the 25-26 adoption. But to summarize that, back in December is when we initially amended the 24-25 general fund budget, when we knew what our funding was from the state, our per pupil count. We have not had significant changes in the count. And we haven't really had that much significant activity as well for the change in the activity from the December activity until now here in June. But I do want to just point out a couple of areas. So back in December, with the information that we knew at the time, we did expect that we would close the year adding about $276,000 to our fund balance, ending the year with about $23 million or 21.2%. We are projecting that we will be adding $780,000, so an additional $500,000 to the general fund balance, closing the year out closer to $23.5 million. The most significant changes, if you look at the revenue from $108.8 million to $110.9, so you can see that's a $2 million change, is really in the area of two things. There's inverse relationship between our property tax collections as well as the state aid funding. So when property tax values change, then the state makes us whole. So you can see a switch between the decline in the local source revenue and then an increase in state. But also at the time, back in December, we were aware we would receive some funding to reimburse certain employees for a 3% healthcare contribution this year. We didn't know what that amount was just yet, and we hadn't received the funding. We know that now, as well as the final allocations of some categorical grants, which would be our state grants. And so those are the most significant changes there in that state source revenue. And then the majority of that $2.6 million is actually offset with almost $1 million in benefits with a reimbursement. So you can see down below the line, we're adding $1.6 million to expenditures. About $1 million of that is that reimbursement. So this is where we expect to close out the 24-25 year, adding $780,000 and closing the year out with a fund balance of about 21.3%. That takes us to 25-26. At this time, we are not aware of what our budget is from the state. We are highly dependent on the state of Michigan. The majority of our funding does follow the pupil. And at this time, although we do now have the different proposals from the executive branch, the governor, the House, and the Senate, the three branches have not yet had the opportunity to come together and negotiate the difference and provide to us what our financial package looks like for 25-26. Our year does not align with the state's, so the state's year does begin October 1st. We are required by law to adopt a budget for next year no later than July 1. So at this time, we take a look at all of the three different proposals and put forth our best, and I would say also our most conservative projections of what next year's funding may look like with the information we have. We do know what our tax base is, so we are projecting that the 18 mills, we will generate just under 17 million. And from our hold harmless millage and based on the FTE that we're projecting for next year, which is just over that 4,900 mark, we do plan on collecting about 19 million in hold harmless revenue. We've been really fortunate for the past couple of years that we have been carrying on our money markets and our CDs an interest rate of about 4. It ranges depending on the investment security, but we've been really fortunate to be collecting around 4 to 5%. Conservatively, we anticipate that the money market funds, that interest rate will go down next year. And so we've reduced that local source revenue estimate by about $500,000. Now, we will look at this again. This will remain fluid. If there are not changes in the interest rates, then going into the fall and going into that December amendment, we may be able to bump that allocation up again. Part of the discussion on Thursday was around the removal of indirect cost revenue, really a change in the reporting of indirect cost revenue. So this $800,000 is built into the 24-25 local budget item. That is essentially a transfer in from our center program at the recommendation of the county. We are going to be reporting that not as local revenue, but an actual transfer in from the center program. So although we remove $800,000, still about $1 million carries forward, and then we'll talk about the remaining amount of the transfer as well. From a state perspective, we are a declining enrollment district. So I do feel like I've been on, press repeat for the 18 months that I've been here, but we are a declining enrollment district. We do forecast receiving district-wide funding for about 4,900 kids. So that's actually 4,920 based on our cohorts as of spring. When we know our count in October, we will update that and marry our count up to what our actual funding is. But currently, that is a decrease of about 100 kids. I want to point out a typo on this slide, so we'll update it and get this updated as well. The foundation is expected to be 13,835. So currently we receive from property taxes and the state of Michigan. We have a foundation allowance of $13,443. We are anticipating a target foundation allowance of $10,000, plus our hold harmless funding of the $3,835. That's a $392 increase per kid. So, sorry, that's my fault, and we'll correct that. The next slide is actually correct. I just want to point out, albeit 392 is right around a 4% increase, and albeit certainly significant because of the declining impact, the net impact to the district is still a reduction of 1.1 in operating revenue from the state. We do remove non-recurring revenue and also non-recurring expenses across the board. So the non-recurring revenue is $7.5 million. These are those categorical grants that I just mentioned. The offsetting expenditures that will be removed from the expenditure base is $3.5 million. So just $3.94 million of that revenue, which is that reimbursement of the retirement rate, is not expected to carry forward into 25-26. Federal revenue in total, we don't have too many significant changes there, but just to point out that the last of the COVID funding dollars have run out. So we had 3 months this year to spend the remaining dollars, July, August, and September. So we do remove the last of the COVID funding that we utilized for some summer school and additional supplemental services to our kids. But we are also in receipt of the Filter First grant, and those two essentially offset each other. So we will recognize the impact of Filter First as well as the offsetting expenditure. Inter-district revenue, the primary source to the district is the PA-18 special education millage. Oakland ISD collects that on behalf of the local districts and then passes that through. And we do know that is increasing about $500,000. We do have preliminary allocations from last year, so we've increased that. The transfers in, we are recommending a transfer in from our center program. This looks a little bit different than the past. So $1 million of it coincides with the $800,000. So whether we had recorded it as local revenue, the estimate was $1 million. The additional $1 million is a one-time transfer from the Center Program Fund. The Center Program Fund does account for the Wing Lake activities. We are a fiscal agent at the county level of 2 programs over at Wing Lake, but also our DHH program. Really as a benefit, I would say as a benefit to operating the program on behalf of the county. The county does require that we carry forward in that program for emergencies, capital needs, 7% fund equity. Their formula for fund equity actually looks a little bit different than our fund equity formula. It's based on prior year expenditures. It removes certain operating activities that we would generally consider in our base. And as a benefit, they do require us that we carry 7%. We've been carrying just under 30%. So the county, has indicated that it is completely appropriate. Very common practice of other fiscal agents to transfer the residual fund equity out of that into our general fund. Now, I just want to keep in mind that just for everyone at the table and to understand, it's not a transfer to subsidize the cost of general education. It is a benefit to help subsidize the costs of our general education, our general fund special education costs, because we do carry quite a few costs, to support our special education students. The funding that we receive from the state and from federal sources is $3 million less than the cost of educating those students. And so this additional transfer will help subsidize the cost of that base. Recognizing that it does look a little bit different, but providing some why behind that. This is a 5-year summary of our foundation allowance as well as the projected 25-26. You can see here that from 2021 until Through 24-25, that foundation allowance has increased from $12,364 to $13,443. We do break it out into the 3 different buckets to show the per pupil, the per pupil equivalent of that foundation allowance. So they're all various shades of Bloomfield blue. So I wish I could say purple or green, but if you're looking at the, if you go, in the bar graph, the darker of the Bloomfield blues or teals, the $6,580 for 25-26 is actually the amount that we expect to collect from the state of Michigan. That middle graph there, the middle section, the 3,420 is the per pupil equivalent of our local operating taxes. So we do not collect $13,835 from the state of Michigan on top of the operating property tax. It is an equation that does factor that we will assume and receive a certain amount of local revenue from property taxes. And then that top bar is that $3,835 of our hold harmless revenue. And then I like just to highlight that 52%, 52.5 is dependent upon voter approval for the operating millage. Likewise, here is the state aid membership history for the past 5 years, as well as our projected, and you can see that impact of declining enrollment right here. 2021 has 2 different numbers. The state, 2021 was that full fiscal year that we went into after the pandemic, and there was they called it the super blend formula, so it was a different formula to fund us. You can see that we actually, in the traditional funding, would have been funded for 5,378 students, but the state propped us up that year, and we received funding for 5,511. And you've seen that decline since 2021 through 24-25. We're currently being funded for just over 5,000 FTE, and we're projected to lose 97 going into 25-26. This does not appear to level off until 2036, 37-ish, another 10 years. This is another one of those calculations and projections that remain very fluid. So in the fall, when we know what our October account is, we will also update our projections going into 26, 27, and beyond. We do another count in February. It's our spring count. I guess technically it's still winter, but it's the spring count for the state. And then we will again update our projections. So if we were to look at this a year ago, we were anticipating that we would be closer to 40. We were anticipating would be closer to about 4,800, maybe 4,850. So I know in both of those counts, we gained 25 FTE, fortunately in the lower grade levels, and so that does carry forward and change those projections. So we will maintain those, but we've been our methodology for the projection and the count has been fairly accurate with a very low percentage variance. The other side would be the expenditure assumptions. We have 5 main categories of expenditures. We are a service organization. The majority of our costs are people. And so we have salaries and the benefits that follow, purchase services, which would be the contracts to third-party organizations, also people. So think about our custodial contract, as well as repairs and maintenance costs follow this bucket. And then we have supplies and capital outlay and other. So salaries and benefits make up the majority of our budget. We have adjusted salaries going into 25-26 to reflect known contractual agreements. We have recognized the savings from attrition. As folks retire and they are at the higher end of the scale, if we do need to replace the position, there is an assumed savings from a teacher that is retiring at the high end of the scale compared to bringing in a newer teacher right out of college. So there's a savings there. Additionally, we have savings from attrition by looking at our enrollment and what our staffing needs are. And so we've been really fortunate. You've probably heard Superintendent West and I, even Deputy Superintendent Keith McDonald, say the tricky part about losing 97 students is they aren't all in the same grade level, in the same building, in buckets of 25 perfectly. They're scattered throughout the district, which makes it very challenging. It isn't a 1-for-1 like ratio, that for every 25 kids, we lose this many students, and it's not perfect. We were in a position this year that with less incoming elementary students, we have the need for fewer elementary sections. And we had quite a few elementary retirements this year. And so we were able to achieve some attrition savings at the full value of a contract without laying off any employees. So the savings from a replacement, we had to replace a speech and language position, but also the savings from not replacing students are also recognized in this budget here. I do want to point out that we have three different contracts that are currently being negotiated right now and have not yet settled. So one of them, and certainly the most significant and largest of our contracts, is our teacher contract, followed by our building administrators, and then our early childhood teachers as well. So we are currently bargaining with all three of those groups. We have not settled. So there is some cushion, some estimates, forecasts of what we might be able to predict, just as we did last year with parapros, built into this budget. It will not be perfect. And so I do anticipate then once we know what those contracts will look like going into the fall, we'll have to update our salaries for, and the benefits that follow for those contracts. Speaking of benefits, the average blended retirement rate, there has been a change this year in the State Aid Act and the legislation, which reduced our retirement rate, certainly not to the amount that we were hopeful for, but our average retirement rate this year is 28% compared to 30.5 for 24-25. And then we are subject to PA 152 for our health care, and that base did increase 4%. Our open enrollment is a calendar year, and so we'll realize 2% of that employer health care increase. There will be some savings from those folks that have retired or new folks coming in, perhaps maybe at a single contract rather than family, but we anticipate those savings will essentially just be cost neutral with the impact of the 2%. The purchase services, the most significant and notable increase to the purchase services line would be our custodial contract. If you recall, I do believe that was at the April, or I think it was the April meeting, the Board of Education approved the award for, we will be, entering into a new service agreement with a new custodial contract provider, and that contract, and whether it was the existing vendor or our new vendor, we were going to realize a significant increase to our general fund and our ancillary funds. The impact to the general fund is $600,000. From a supplies line, it does look like on this slide, when we copied the pictures, perhaps their total instruction is actually supplies. So Excel may have been funny with me, so we'll take a look at that. But from a supplies line, there are not significant changes to supplies or outgoing tuition, just to be aware of that. That's why I didn't highlight that. But you should be aware, as I mentioned with the with a one-time revenue, if there was an offsetting one-time expenditure, regardless of the category, salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies, outgoing tuition, that's all been removed, and the impact of this is here. So for 25-26, when we put this all together, you can see that the total revenue is 106.2 million, a reduction of 4.57 million compared to 24-25. From an expenditure perspective, 110 million. We are projecting 108 million of expenditures for 25-26. I did include the 23-24 audited actual amount. I think it's important to see that, for 25-26 compared to 2 years ago, you could see the impact of the reduction in revenue, but we've also made efforts to reduce our expenditures, and we are still projecting expenditures less than we had 2 years ago in 23-24. There weren't too many one-time expenditures buried in that amount, still $500,000 less. But the impact of that is a deficit of next year of just under 2 million at 1.9 million. So we are making a recommendation and asking the Board of Education to approve a strategic use of fund balance for 25-26. We are closing out the 24-25 year with we are anticipating 23.5 million. Our fund balance policy, as you're all aware, is 15 to 20%, closing that year out at 21. So we're in a very healthy fiscal position, and we are really what this fund balance policy does, as well as the fortunate amount that we are able to do, is it allows us to absorb reductions. It allows us a longer runway to make tougher decisions going into the 26-27 year as we really align our budget with a new strategic plan, especially in a time of unknown right now. We do not know what our state funding is. There's uncertainties at both the state and the federal level. And we are fortunate to have a healthy fund balance that does allow us to not make rash decisions right now and cut programming to our students for the 25-26 year. And with that 1.9 million, we do still expect to end the year at about 21.5 million in our fund balance, just still hovering at that 20%. So looking ahead, I've mentioned these all throughout the presentation. We are a declining student enrollment district. We have presented a budget that would articulate a structural deficit, which would require us to align our budget priorities with the strategic plan that we will be developing during the 25-26 year concurrently. We will aim to continuously normalize staffing. You might hear it as realignment, but normalize our staffing to match our enrollment. One of the areas, too, that we will be focusing efforts on next year is a review of our various fee-for-service programs that are living in our general fund that are operating at deficits as well, and making some recommendations as administration to what those programs might look like in terms of staffing and from a fee structure, so that they are at least cost neutral. And then looking ahead, I do anticipate in the summer, probably at some point in July, we will know what our budget is for the year. In October, we should know what our staffing, what our student count is. And then we will bring forth, based on that information, a formal budget revision to the board in December of 2025. However, prior to that, in your board updates, we will keep you apprised of any developments in terms of our budget, and with what we know right now and what our forecast is, what does this look like for Bloomfield Hill School? So it will not be the first time that you will hear of what is going on in 25-26, but formally we'll make an amendment in December of 2025. Special revenue funds, as you're aware, we do have certain ancillary funds separate that are for the purpose, they're all developed for a very specific purpose, and we carry them outside of our general operating funds such as food service, the center program, International Academy. The two up at the top, the International Academy and the center programs, are the programs that we are the fiscal agents for at a countywide level. And then we have right now, we have 4 special revenue funds that are specific to Bloomfield Hills Schools, our food service fund, the community services program, the co-curricular endowment fund. We are planning, when we have this conversation next year, this will go away. We're planning on spending that down in its entirety in 25-26. And then our Hills activities account would be our student activities accounts that we must now account for in our financial statements of the district. We spent a fair amount of time having conversations and amending these budgets for 24-25 in April, so we are not presenting a budget adjustment for 24-25 to the Board of Education in June right now. So the April amendment will serve as the final amendment for those. Oops, I just spilled, that's embarrassing. Okay, I'm gonna move this. Anyways. My husband always tells me that I am the worst with lids, and I left my lid off. This will not surprise him. He'll get a good laugh out of that. But I don't want to, I really don't want to break any technology.
It doesn't shock you, you're fine.
I know. No, I'm good. I'm good. I mean, hey, it could make things interesting, right? Okay. So going into 25-26, we do approve those, or the Board of Education does approve those at a consolidated level. However, in all of your information packets, you did receive the 24-25 and the 25-26 budgets for those individually as well. Thank you, Mr. Shulkin. Thank you. It takes a village. That's what I say, raising our children, right? Thank you so much. Although I do know someone that would approve a new computer or pay for it. Yeah. So going into 25-26, just for your knowledge, we, Bloomfield Hills Schools, did present draft budgets to the county. We actually need to do that for 25-26. To the county for the center program. So we did update the 25-26 budget, does include certain assumptions for the center programs, but we do expect that those programs will look different in the fall as well, based on the number of pupils and in the program, the kids, as well as where we end up with our teacher's contract. And then we did develop the IA budget with some precision, and we did talk about that in April as well for 25-26. That will also change because the funding is dependent on this funding from the state of Michigan for that tuition program. What we didn't make significant changes to were the food service budgets. We do anticipate, although the House budget does not include funding for the free or reduced lunch for all students in the state of Michigan. We did build that budget assuming that we will have that program next year, and we do have some capital needs that we recognized. From a community service lens, carried that budget forward, really just carrying forward the 24-25 budget into 25-26, some uncertainty around certain programs. And as we work together in the summer to talk through those programs. There are programs at the here in community recreation, also certain programs at the Farm and Nature Center. I do anticipate going into next year that will look different. And so we'll spend some time in the fall and in the winter bringing forth an amendment to that as well. And then the Hills account is really an accounting requirement, so we carry that forward. Generally, the funds that we bring in are the funds that go out, and we do plan on spending down the remaining fund balance sitting in the endowment fund. And then again, the most significant net change in fund balance, you can see the in was the transfer in from the center program in the general fund, and then that would be the transfer out The majority of that would be from the center program, and then 70,000 of that is between food service and the community recreation. So reducing that combined fund balance in the special revenue funds from 6.6 million to 3.4 million in 25-26. Okay. And then that concludes, special effects and all, the 25-26 budget discussion for the Board of Education. I will leave it to your discretion whether you wanted to, or perhaps President Hill, if you wanted to answer questions now, or if at the time of the motion. So I'll entertain either.
I think we should, while the subject is fresh, just discuss it now if there's any discussion.
I think it's important to remind the community that there was a thorough discussion of this at our workshop on Thursday. So the board has had time to digest this information, have conversations and communications with our finance office, and have some questions. So if there's others tonight, that's fine, but it's important for the community to know that you have seen this.
And had plenty of dialogue around it on last Thursday's meeting, yes.
I
Okay.
don't have questions, I have thanks for all the hard work that you've done through this. I think it's also important to note, because it's something I didn't realize the first time, but you pointed it out and it caught my eye. 23 to 24 versus 25 to 26, 3.6 million less in revenue, but almost the same in terms of expenses. So trying to manage what we do with less funding due to everything that's happening, I mean, that's pretty admirable. So I think that goes to show how much hard work you are doing, your team is doing, and trying to manage the fiduciary responsibilities best of your ability. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Candace.
It's all set? Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
For your time.
All right. Moving on to section 5 of the agenda, the superintendent's report.
I just really have a statement. As we wrap up the school year, I want to take a moment to thank our incredible staff, students, families, and of course, this Board of Education. This has been my first year as superintendent of Bloomfield Hills Schools, and I'm truly grateful for the warm welcome, the trust, and the shared commitment to our students. This past month has been nothing short of extraordinary, from the BHS graduation to the prep ceremony, from 5th and 8th grade celebrations to move-up days and everything in between. What a month, what a year. These moments have been joyful reminders of why we do this work. Looking ahead, I'm excited about next year's strategic planning process. It will be an important opportunity to come together as a community to define our shared direction and priorities. I'm genuinely looking forward to those conversations. Thank you again for an incredible year, and I wish everyone a safe, restful, and happy summer break. I can't wait to see what next year brings us.
Thank you, Superintendent West. Moving on to 6, Board President's Report. Just on that note, I also, sorry, I'm having some slow Wi-Fi. I had some talking points jotted down that I need to pull up. I also want to wish congratulations to the students and staff who've successfully completed the 24-25 school year, and special congratulations to our seniors who graduated. I hope everyone's summers are off to a wonderful start. We've made references to the special meeting workshop that we had last Thursday evening, which we covered a wide array of topics at that. I think that occasional workshop format is very good and productive for the board. There was a ton of work that went into preparation for that meeting between Superintendent West and his staff, as well as all the board members. A lot of engagement to prepare and have good dialogue, which was a good way to wrap up the school year, pulling up our sleeves and getting all that work done. So thank you for that. Today, the board completed the superintendent evaluation, which we are required to do once annually, and there's a more robust update on that during section 10H later on in this evening's agenda. So that's it. There will be more from me on that later on in the meeting. Now moving on to section 7, public comment. And I do believe we have some public comment this evening. Is that accurate? No? Okay. All right, moving on to Section 8, consent agenda. Starting with 8A, Trustee Noble.
I move the Board of Education to approve the recommendations detailed in the consent agenda as presented.
Support.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, motion passes 6-0.
Do we want to attempt to get through some 10?
Sure. We are going to be doing special recognition at 7:30, which is in 23 minutes. So let's move on to Section 10, Board Business. Let's start with 10A, although David's not.
David,
I bet you he's going to run in
He-
and like read them too.
Yeah, he's got the first three, so. There he is.
I was so close. I was so close.
Sorry, we called
gonna scream into
it,
the
we called an audible on.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Moving on to 10A, the request to 10A through C, if you want to read each of those. The first is regarding the furniture. The second is regarding the bid for the AV broadcast systems. And the third, C, is regarding the bid for physical move management services. Is there any, well, first, let's think about this. Well, I guess we'll go through one at a time and see if there's any discussion. So is there a motion regarding 10A?
I move the Board of Education approve to not exceed the purchase of furniture totaling $368,719.73 for the current phase of FF&E procurement as presented. Total sum includes the procurement of furniture, contingency, delivery, installation services, and are be paid using the bond funds.
For a second.
I second that.
All right, any discussion?
Just a general question about input from constituencies who are going to be using this. Did you go out to the teachers, students, staff to see if this is the furniture that they wanted to use for these? I think we've had this discussion before, but consistent with those prior discussions.
It's always worth reviewing. So if we, let me take you back in time. So roughly about 6 years ago when we started our focus groups for the bond, that started our stakeholder input. And from there, as we went through furniture, and I'll talk specifically about furniture, we did everything from pilots to focus groups from students, families as well, and staff. And along the way, those have informed those decisions, and we continue, and the stuff in front of you actually has our stakeholder input as well. And part of that is musical storage, which you'll be approving instruments later, hopefully in a few minutes or so. And those are all kind of intertwined and input from many stakeholders around that.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No, motion passes 6-0. Moving on to B. Is there a motion?
I move the Board of Education approve the proposal for the amount of $214,314.96 to Key Code Media, Inc. to be paid by bond funds. The total sum includes procurement, installation, and commissioning of AV broadcast systems for the radio station, the BIF.
Is there a second?
Support.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No, motion passes 6-0. Moving to C. Is there a motion?
I move the Board of Education award physical moving services in the total amount of $50,000 as an increase to the project contingency of the awarded services to Palmer Moving Services, Premier Locations, and Corrigan Moving Systems.
Is there a second?
Support.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, motion passes 6-0. Thank you, Mr. Shulkin. That was impressive that you got in here so fast.
I was 2 seconds off.
All right, moving on to Section D, request to approve purchase of musical instruments and equipment. This will be presented by Todd Bidlack, our Assistant Superintendent of Learning Services. Is there a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the purchase of musical equipment not to exceed $200,000 as presented.
Any second? Yes, there's a second. Any discussion?
I appreciated that the memo that we received actually kind of called out the fact that the constituent input was actually taken in, and these reflect kind of the needs and desires of the staff students with regard to our fantastic music program. So thank you for that.
Thank you, and if I have the opportunity, I really want to thank Kendra as well. She's sitting right behind me and just has done an enormous amount of work, and not just this year, over the last couple of years, itemizing everything that we have to help us come up with this plan today and working with the department and learning services. And so it's just been done incredible work here. And then in the board packet, we've included those quotes as well as other additional quotes that we had, and we've been able to narrow it down to the needs that we want to be able to invest in for next school year.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Motion passes 6-0. Thank you. Moving on to section E and F. Section E is a request to approve fiscal year 24-25 final budget revisions. Is there a motion?
Okay. Go ahead, Lindsay. I heard you. I just didn't hear anybody yet. Yes.
I move that the Board of Education adopt the final budget revisions for fiscal year 2024-25 as detailed in the packet and summarized below.
Second.
Any further discussion? As Superintendent West stated, we did have a much more robust conversation about this at our special workshop meeting last Thursday. So plenty of dialogue was had at that time. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Motion passes 6-0. Thank you. Moving on to F, is there a motion?
In accordance with the Uniform Budget and Accounting Act, I move that the Board of Education adopt the attached resolution related to original budgets for fiscal year 25-26 for the general fund and special revenue funds as required by law and summarized as follows.
Is there a second?
A second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Motion passes 6-0. All right. Moving on to E, request to adopt resolution approving building and site sinking fund replacement proposal presented by Superintendent West. Can we get a motion first before there's any discussion?
I move the Board of Education to adopt a resolution approving building and site sinking fund replacement proposal as presented.
A second.
Second.
All right, any discussion? I
Yes,
know
I
there's going to be some
wanted to
discussion.
add some points. I'm still not comfortable with the sinking fund as at this point, given the information that we have and the uncertainty that the district's facing. So we're declining enrollment. We've got a strategic plan that's in development, which all could potentially change the financial needs of the district. So my preference would be to wait on this until at least it's not expiring until the end of next year. So waiting at least until next year to see how things develop with the strategic plan. And if not that, a shorter duration. We're going for the maximum duration. So looking at a shorter duration would also be something I think we should consider.
Okay.
Just to know, and I think it's also important for the public to understand that the board did have a discussion along with the budget at Thursday's workshop, had a robust discussion, as well as this has been a discussion in the Finance and Operations Committee. So albeit the first time this is being discussed here at the board table during a board meeting, it has had a lot of discussion throughout the last few months. And as the board has considered this, so the recommendation has been, or is, that we ask the community to support a 10-year, $1.5 million sinking fund replacement to be placed on the November 25 ballot. So that's the ask. So if anybody's watching, they understand what the ask is and what Lindsay was just referring to. So that's what's on the table for discussion. And again, there has been robust discussion about this in different forums over the last few months.
And I think there's a little bit of a chicken-egg issue with regard to the strategic plan and the sinking fund, because if we approve a specific level of sinking fund, that's going to impact our strategic plan and what we can offer. But if you put the strategic plan first and you don't get the sinking fund, then you're going to have to redo your strategic plan as well. So it's a very complicated balancing act between the two. But based on the discussion at the last meeting, I was in favor of recommending the approach.
I would acknowledge Trustee Baker's point, which is well stated. I think it is difficult because it's kind of the wrong order. If things were perfect, we'd have a strategic plan done. We'd have maybe better knowledge about other things happening with the county or with just our economy in general and the state's funding and all of that. But if I'm going to err on the side of like, what do I think is going to work best long term, I'm probably still going to err on the side of asking for that amount and going longer. I've seen, we reviewed the list of what's projected out there, the list of projects. I think there's still enough to do. I feel confident over the 10 years, like we will need that amount. So I'm in favor of it, but I understand your position. I think it's fair. I don't think there's necessarily that you're wrong. I think it is a conservative point to look at and try to be responsible. But I felt confident in what we had to do over the next 10 years that I felt better about asking for that. But I just want to acknowledge, I think your point is well stated, and I don't think, I don't think any of us said there's no way that that's irrelevant. I think it is relevant, so.
I would like to state that I knew when Trustee Baker joined the board that she would challenge us and everyone here better than I think anyone would, in a extremely positive way that this community is fortunate to have. And I've observed you ask questions and sink in on details that many people would never think to ask. And I appreciate, and I think that this community is very, very lucky to have you and your services and to the board and the questions that you ask. I was talking to Trustee Colin about this the other day, and the response that we saw to the questions that were being asked, I think, I don't want to misquote you. You said in the 10 years you've been on the board, this is the most impressed you've been with seeing a plan for a proposal like this. Is that accurate? Is that how you feel?
I can comment on the work that our committee did. So myself, Carolyn, and Lindsay, in conjunction with Rick and his team, and it was a team. So we probably spent close to, I would say, over 20 to 30 hours, analyzing, making sure we're being fiscally responsible to our community. There was definitely ranges in terms of what we're looking at, and what we focused on was what are the needs from a security, maintenance, infrastructure, not what the aspirations are, what are the needs over the next 10 years. And through, significant work from their team and our team, we came up with this analysis to come up with this number. And yes, both Carolyn and Lindsay, and myself, challenged. We asked a significant amount of questions, wanted significant amount of detail. And to your point that we talked about, yes, this is the most detail we've gotten since I've been on the board in the last decade. So kudos to Rick, Jacob, Samer, Keith, and company, who put together this detail for us, so we could feel that when we made the recommendation on the meeting last Thursday, we're being fiscally responsible and we're meeting the needs of the district.
Yes, so thank you for everyone involved, and thank you, Trustee Baker, for pushing us to think about this as critically as we have. So, any further discussion on this?
I just wanted to add that I appreciate the strategic planning comment, but I really think even with a strategic plan, we still have all these assets we need to maintain, and that won't go away, especially with all the bond work that we've done. This is going to help maintain that in the long term, and I don't think, in my opinion, that a strategic plan will necessarily change some of those needs. So that's why I think this is a very conservative amount of money we're trying to ask our community for.
I think my point was simply that depending on how much we ask for, that might impact what we decide to go out for in our strategic plan. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't think it impacts our offerings, our current offerings. It just impacts what, if we had $200 million or $1 billion, our strategic plan would look differently than if we have a lesser amount. And if we have nothing, it's going to look very different as well. So if we go out for a sinking fund that isn't reasonable, that doesn't meet kind of our fiduciary obligations, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, our community said they're not interested in X, Y, and Z, and so we're back to the drawing board.
That's fair.
All right, we ready to vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes 5-1. Thank you. Moving on to H, our superintendent evaluation. As I noted earlier in my update, board president update, I referenced this, that today at 4 o'clock, we had a closed session for the purposes of Superintendent West's performance evaluation. Now, for context, this is a superintendent who began last summer, and this was his first school year, first entire school year that he acted as our superintendent. So he was acting for a year in a way that was not set against goals that had been set for him. So we discussed this in our mid-year review and how we were evaluating him against what was an impressive 90-day plan that he laid out for us last summer, and that he did, in fact, it was an extensive 90-day plan, and he did, in fact, complete that within 90 days. And then there were additional factors that we were evaluating, based on the set of circumstances, given that it was his first year. I will note that Superintendent West's rating was effective, is effective, based on the collective feedback of the board. Please note that under the new superintendent evaluation guidelines in the state of Michigan, the rating of effective is the highest rating that can be achieved. The term effective is notably underwhelming. So I wanted to clarify that despite how it sounds, it is the highest rating that he could have received. In our discussions in closed session, we collaboratively identified areas that we all think should be focused on. This was input from the board as well as Superintendent West to discuss areas that we think should be focused on and developed during the 25-26 school year. Probably in July, at the July meeting, we will discuss what the new set of superintendent goals are. So we're having a fresh year with Superintendent West to have a fresh set of goals that he will be evaluated on at this time next year. We will then do a mid-year review, as we are obligated to do, to evaluate Superintendent West against those goals, and that will take place in December of 25 or January of 26, TBD later on this year by the board. So thank you, Superintendent West, for how much work you've put into your first year, and how detailed the discussion was, thanks to all your efforts. So that concludes section H of the agenda.
You gotta make, for each.
Oh, I apologize. I went into all that and no one actually made the motion. So thanks for keeping me in check there. If someone has a motion, please.
I move the Bloomfield Hills Board of Education to adopt the completed 2024-25 year-end evaluation of the superintendent, Rick West, pursuant to the Michigan law, including 1249 and 1249B of the revised school code as completed.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Motion passes 6-0, and it will be adopted. Let's take a 5-minute recess, please, before we do, we will go back to section 9 of the agenda for special recognition, which starts at 7:30. We are reconvening from a quick recess. We are moving to section, agenda item 9, which is our special recognition. Starting with A, celebrating success, U.S. Presidential Scholars Program recipients. This has Dr. Dan Hartley listed as the presenter, but it looks like it will be Mr. Bidlack.
Yes, I'm filling in for that, and I am going to get started with the U.S. Presidential Scholars Program, which recognizes and honors distinguished graduating high school students. This program acknowledges students who score exceptionally well on either the SAT or the ACT, or are nominated for outstanding scholarship, students who demonstrate exceptional talent in the visual, creative, or performing arts, and students who demonstrate ability and accomplishment in career and technical education fields. This is one of the nation's highest honors for high school students, as each year only 161 students are named as presidential scholars. So I'm first going to begin by asking if he is here, Jackson Kaplan Rudolph, to come on up, as he was actually named as a semifinalist. Okay, and then I'm going to continue. Also, the next students are either from Bloomfield Hills High School or the IA. And first we have Jinlu Jang, Nithya Katakol. Come on up come on. Okay, we have one. And then just stay right up here until we have everybody up here. Aiden's son. Okay. Tasneem Basha. Jaeming Gan. Aya Maskun. Fernanda Solman Perez Marino. And Stephanie Snyder. Okay, all right. And that's everybody for this category.
Good evening. I'm Sarah Fairmer. I'm the Executive Director of Learning Services, and I have the joy of introducing the Bloomfield Hills High School Forensics Team. We're proud to recognize the Bloomfield Hills High School Forensics Team for an exceptional 2025 season. 40 students competed in the MIFA individual events at state finals at Saginaw Valley State University, with 46 high schools in attendance. BHS earned third place overall in Class A, exceptional, and outstanding team achievement. 21 students advanced to the elimination rounds and received individual recognition. Tonight, we'd like to highlight our state champions. Students earned first place in the state in their events. Zena Jandali, grade 10, are you here? Zena is the state champion in informative speaking. Congratulations. Zena, wait a second. And Jared Shee, grade 10, are you here? All right. Jared is our state champion in original or oratory. Helps if I could do that right. Congratulations to these outstanding performers and to the entire forensics team on a season filled with talent, dedication, and excellence. Congratulations.
And I don't have to wait, Megan, I can just.
Please
Do you
do.
have to officially go to, okay.
Please go
And next we have Mary Baldwin, if she could come up. Mary is our orchestra teacher of the year. She was one of our finalists, or one of the state finalists. And yes, and she's our orchestra teacher at South Hills Middle School, Conant, and Lone Pine. Mary was a finalist for Teacher of the Year by the Michigan Chapter of American String Teachers Association. The award recognized educators who have dedicated at least a decade to teaching in Michigan, demonstrated excellence in music performance and education, and provided outstanding service to string education in the state. Mary was one of only 3 finalists for Teacher of the Year this year, and we are proud of Mary and her dedication to the students of the orchestra program for over the past 24 years. Is that number, was that 24 is right? Okay.
All right. That concludes the special recognition section of our agenda this evening. All right, so we've moved around a little bit. The only item left is Section I of the agenda titled Oakland County Parks and Recreation Partnership. This actually could have just been a part of my board president update, but it did end up getting its own agenda item. But this will just be a brief update from me, won't require any board action. Oakland County Parks approached our superintendent to express interest in exploring a potential partnership with Bloomfield Hills Schools regarding our nature center as well as our farm. At this time, these conversations have been entirely preliminary. No formal legal proposals have been made or exchanged. As a board, it is our fiduciary duty to fully evaluate any proposal that has been made or ask our superintendent to continue the conversation for the purpose of tracking down more details for our consideration. So the next step will be Superintendent West will coordinate with Oakland County. Oakland County, to my knowledge, did propose that they would help to facilitate a public forum. Not sure exactly what that would look like, but they indicated that they were willing to push that. So Superintendent West will coordinate with Oakland County to discuss what that public forum session and/or sessions, which will provide our community with the opportunity to share their views. The goal of these public forum sessions will be for residents to learn more about what is being offered and provide input and feedback. Only after those community conversations take place will the board begin any formal discussion. And once we have more information to work with in terms of hearing what is being offered, we will have those discussions publicly at a board meeting. We remain committed to keeping this process open and inclusive, and we appreciate the community's continued engagement as we move forward. No decision will be made without formal board action at a public board meeting. So that is the full statement on that. That is the end of the agenda. If everyone is settled, we will move on to Section 11, and we are adjourned. Thank you.